Hello everyone, welcome back to the Swift Academy. Today we are trying to finalize our project Top Trending Movies that we created it with the MVVM pattern in the iOS with the Swift language. We used the binding for connecting the view models to the main view controller and presenting data inside our view, and using a free API to getting the list of all the endpoints related to the top trending movies. We created the cell view model and also passing data from the main view model to the view controller, and creating a list of the cell view models and passing each of them to each row as a view model of that cell to present this data. So bear with me, we are now trying to finalize this project. By clicking each row, we are going to navigate to the next view and showing the details of each movie. With that, we are going to show you how you can pass the data, pass a view model and the data inside it, and inject it to the next details view and call it from there to show and represent the other data related to each row. So let's jump into the code. Now let me show you what we are going to create for this session. We have the list of our top trending movies here now. We getting the data from the server, we convert it to the each cell view model, and each cell view model pass the data to the view itself, and the view going to represent the data related to their own view models. But when we are going to click each cell, we want to open a details page to have another image on it, the title, and a little bit of description of that. We are going to do that just to show you how you can grab the data from each cell and pass it to the view model of the details page, create the view model, and then inject the view model of the details page to this view controller and representing the data. That is so useful. The dependency injection pattern actually will be happen here because before you opening the view controller, you create the data that you really need as the view model of this details view, and then passing the data to the view controller, and that view controller going to present it. This approach gonna be so helpful for you even in the TDD approach, test driven development, or even when you are going to reuse a view multiple times but with different endpoint, with different data and views. So bear with me, we are going to create all the details related to this view and how to pass the data to that. So at the first, inside our controllers, we need another group for the details view controller. I'm going to create a new group here, and I'm going to call it as the details movie view controller. And it's better to name your files underneath of each group as the same name as it is. It is good and readable for you and later on for your other friends or teammates. So I'm going to create a new Cocoa Touch class as the UI view controller, and also ask the Xcode to create the zip file for me too. So click next, create, and there it is. We have two files here, one the zip file and one the UI view controller itself, the Swift file. I'm getting rid of these kind of the boilerplate codes here, and let's going to design our view at first to see what really we need here. If we are going to look at our details view here, we need an image view at the top, and then we need the title label and then a description label. So simple, just to present to you about how you can create such these simple data. the important thing behind that, how you are going to pass the data to that view. So image view, I'm going to put the image view at the top, and trailing, leading, and also the height. For the constraints, I'm going to the top one to the 0, the left and the right, I'm going to have the padding of the 8 on each of them. But for the height, let me show you something. For the height of this image view, I want to make it 1/3 of the view. So by keeping the control button, holding that, and then moving the cursor to the view, you have the equal height here. If I do that, you can see there is some equation between the height of the image view and the height of the whole view here. If I click on one of those, you can see that the multiplier is now 23. Let me do it by 25%. It means that the height of the image view will be 25% of the whole view. So now we are going to add the label as a title here, and also we need another label. By holding the Alt and moving the cursor, you are simply duplicate whatever you want there. So for the label, I'm going to use the same padding here, 8 to 8, and for the top I'm going to use the 16. It should be center. Need to add anything to this our view. Just for the image view, I'm going to make it aspect fill to by keeping the aspect ratio but filling whole the image that we want here. We come back to our own view controller, make some clean coding here. I'm putting the IB outlets on the top of it, so we know that this is the IB outlet section that we need here. But now when we are going to passing the data, this view controller itself needs another view model. So for the view model here, we need to define it somehow. Okay, var view model. But this view model should be created. I'm going to name this view model here as the details movie view model. So details movie view model. But we not actually creating it yet, so let me create this view model inside our view model folder, new file, Swift file, and we are going to create a class, the name as it is, class details movie view model, and we are creating that class. And when we come back to our details view controller that we created, details movie view controller, it will be green. It means that okay, we already created that. But we want to inject this view model to our own view controller, and this view model should contains the movie object to representing data. So we will come back to the details view model. It needs a movie object var movie. It will be movie object, and it should be have an initializer. So init movie, it's a type of the movie object, and we are going simply just self.movie equal to movie. And let's see inside our movie view controller details what will be happen now. So we need to inject it to our details movie view controller, and it is yelling at me because I don't have any initializer for this view model. So let me create an initializer inside the view controller itself too. It needs to have a view model. So our view model will be consist of the details movie view model. It is the type of that, and when we are creating or calling the details movie view controller, we have to pass its own view model to this view controller as well. So self.viewModel is equal to the view model that passing data inside the initializer, and after that we are going to call the super.init nib name. It means that we are now going to initialize the view and the zip file of the details movie view controller. So when we calling this view controller, first of all we passing the view model from where or from what class you are going to have your data, and then we initialize the whole view controller with the zip file itself. So it's going to be a string file, and because the both of the name of the zip file and the class name is the same, we can use that. In the Xcode and the Swift language, it is always required us, if the initializer is going to be failed, we have to have this required initializer. So if something happened there wrong, the app going to be crashed because of this fatal error. So don't worry, app will not be crashed, but this is a mandatory thing inside the Swift language, so we will put it here. As you can see, simply we create our UI view controller, we create the view model, we create the initializer for the view controller, and also we create the view model with an initializer itself that getting the movie object. So when we are trying to call this view controller, we have to pass this view model that already initialized with one movie object. Let me finish the details movie view controller and configuring the view to see how it will look like after we passing the data. So like before, we need a function called config view, and inside our config view we need to create our own data and passing the data ready for presenter. So function config view. But take a look at our view here. What we really need, just an image, just a title, and just a description. So we don't need more of these data here, we just need 3D data. So when the view model is going to be passing data to it, it doesn't need to pass all the movie object to the view controller. View controller should be dumb as enough to just present whatever coming from the view model. So when we're going back to our view model, we have to have other kind of the objects, like we need to have the movie image. What kind of the movie image we are going to present? As you remember, it should be a URL because it is going to load from the server. Then we are going to have the movie title. It's going to be a string. Then we are going to have the movie description. It's going to be a string again. And also we need to have the movie ID, or what else we going to call it, but I'm going to have the movie ID. Maybe later on we are going to expand our application and we need those IDs. So now, just right after we initialize our movie object, we can specify it or add or create these items that are necessary for our view. So as I said before, all the logic should be happen inside the view model, not inside the view controller. View controller just a view. So self.movie ID going to be equal to the movie.id. Self.movie title is going to be, remember that we have some issue with the movie title, because sometimes they have just title and sometimes they have just the name. So we are going to use this pattern, movie.name, or if none of them is true or they have any value, we are just simply retaining as the empty string for now. Later on we can expand it, later on we can actually put it inside a function to call it. Then we have the self.movie image. the movie image actually should be created inside another function. So we have to create it, make image URL. If you remember, we have to create the image URL based on the combination of the image server and the image name. So I'm just going to pass the movie dot backdrop path image to it, and it will be empty. So let me create this function while we are on it, make image URL. We need that function here. It should be private because it is just useful inside this view model, and it is going to ask just one parameter, its image code or image name as the string, and in the return we are going to have just an optional URL because that URL may be near. So URL a string, and if you remember, we have a network constants here. Network constants, it is a singleton. We have the shared, we have the image server address, and after that we can have the image code that actually coming from as the parameters to this function. Okay, what else remains here? We should have the description, self dot movie description is going to be movie dot, for example, I think it should be our view. So if it is empty, we're just going to passing that. Okay, let me see what is the error here. Self-use in method call before all stored properties are initialized. Okay, it is saying that you have to initialize all stored properties, and then you can use one self of the function inside this initializer to call the outside of the initializer for the private function. So before that we didn't actually initialize the movie description, and we are trying to call another function to getting back the data. So first of all, we have to initialize all of them. If all of them even needs to another function to call, it should be happen in that way. So this is the Swift way, but we can actually obey that and trying to do that. So this is a good point here. I think it will be useful for you in the next future. So now we just create our view model here. Now let's jump back to the details view controller that we created, and we're trying to configure it. So what is the details? Here you are, and inside the config view we simply can actually add our data here. So first of all, self dot title, I'm going to put the title as the movie details here, movie details for the title of the page, and then our title label dot text is going to be view model dot movie title because we already initialized it. And then for the description label dot text, I'm going to add view model dot movie description. And for the image, if you remember, we import the SD web image package manager here, so we have to import it here as well, SD web image, because we are going to load that image from the URL. So movie image view, let me see, image view, sorry, the image view object here. And because we are using the SD web image, it has its own way to set the image, and it needs a URL. If you remember, we create that URL inside our view model dot movie image, and it will be created for us. As you can see, all the logic behind those things to just representing data inside our view controller happening inside our view model. So we create our details view controller, we already created our details movie model, and now let's see how we can call it and pass the data through that. So we can come back to the main view controller table view and find out when we are going to click on each row what overriding function will be called. We have an overriding function here, did select row out inside our table view. So when each row clicked, it means that the add row will be the delegation of the table view will be called, and each of them will be happening here and telling this function and calling this function. Okay, this kind of the row at that specific index path row, it's touched or clicked. So we can put our codes here. So let's see what kind of the codes we need now. First of all, we need to get the movie ID. Let movie ID, because we're passing all the movie cell data to this view controller. We are not accessing the view, the whole data source inside the view controller. We can access that through the view model, but with the data that already exists inside this view controller, it's just the data source of each cell, that it is just the view cell view models. So we can use the cell data source that we have it here as the index path, and then row, and then we just need the ID of that. So we're grabbing the ID of the movie, then we have to open the view details. But wait a minute, we are now inside an extension related to the table view, where you put all the table view stuffs here. We are not going to put opening or passing the data here. So we're just creating another function here, self.open details, and we have to pass the movie ID there. We are going to create this function in a second, bear with me. Movie ID that we just grabbing here, and then we are going to create this function inside our main view controller. If you have a big project, maybe you are going to have another extension rather than the table view as the helper, or as a just moving around, whatever you will call it, because in the big projects you are not going to put a lot of codes inside the main view controller. You are going to put all of them inside on each extensions itself. So I'm going to create the function open details. It needs a movie ID, it's gonna be integer, and let me see what should put here to call and open that. As you remember, we created a view model details, so we have to get the movie out of the data source and pass the movie object to the view model of the new details view. So for getting the data, we can use the guardlet, because we just have the ID of the movie and we don't have the whole movie object. We can use that view. We can get the movie from the view model dot data source, and then we can use the filter function here to get that. But wait a minute, is that another logic? Yes, that's another logic. So we have to put that logic inside the view model. Maybe later on we are going to use that again. View model, inside the main view model, we have to create our own logic again here. And the logic that I'm trying to actually create here is that to getting the ID of the movie, and in the return it's going to pass the movie object itself. So the function will be named retrieve movie, and it will be need that with ID object integer, and in the return we are going to have a movie object, but maybe it's not going to find anything, so it will be optional, and we will put it as the nil. So we can retrieving or getting the data by the high order function called, for example, first, filter, or where. And because of that, maybe there's not something so much inside that, we have to use the guard statement here. Guard let our movie is gonna be the data source inside our view model, main view model dot results dot first. As you can see, we have the where here, we have the closure, first where, the first item, that ID, it's gonna be equal to our own ID here. Else, we're just going to returning nil, it means that we didn't find that movie. But if we found it, we just return the movie. We put this function inside our view model because it is a logical thing. Maybe later on we want to find the movie and manipulate it or change something inside it and then return it back to the view controller to pass the data. So all the logics just like that should be inside our view model. So now when I come back to our main view controller, we have the movie, we have the view model, and then we can just simply retrieve movie with ID. We have the ID here, movie ID, and we pass it. And because it will be nil, we already put the guardlet here, and we are going to put an else and just return. It means that if the data can't be loaded, it's just going to be returned, and the UI will be not continue to load anything for us. So we just return here. And then what else? Now we have the movie object. When we have the movie object, we have to pass it to our table view or details view controller. So first of all, you remember that we need to create the view model object. So let details view model, and it's gonna be details movie view model. And if you open the initializer, it just asks as movie object. We pass our own movie, and then you need the controller. Let details controller and details movie view controller. And if you open the initializer, you can see that it is going to ask you a view model because we already put the initializer for it. Okay, give me my view model. So we are going to pass the details view model that we just created here. Now we have the controller, and now we can actually using our self navigation controller to push view controller to the details controller animated through. As you can see, we're just injecting the view model inside the details movie view controller, and it's called injection. In many ways, the dependency injection will be called it. If the view model, if it is not just kind of the protocol that this view controller going to be submit that for that kind of the protocols, you can change everything and just inject your code to the view controller or to any classes. But wait a minute, because we are going to do something inside the main thread, it is safe to put that inside the dispatch queue.main.async. Don't remember to do that. Always when you are trying or even in doubt to if it is going to call from the main thread or not, always put it inside the dispatch queue.main.async and then call it. So for the recap, let me see what will be happen inside the table view. Then we have the open details here, and what it's called the movie ID. The movie ID is coming from the cell data source ID. When we calling the open details here, it's going to ask the view model, okay, what is my movie object? It's going to retrieve the movie with the movie ID because we don't have the movie object itself inside our class because it's just a view controller, just a view. You don't have all the movie object there, just have its own cell view models. And then we retrieve the movie object, we create the details view model, pass the details view model to the view controller, and then navigate it to the view controller. The view controller itself needs its own view model that we already passed. Okay, let's build and see if it is working for us or not. So here you are. I'm going to click the Dr. Strange here. Oh, here you go. Now we are opening the details. We have the image view that loaded with the help of the SD-Web image. We have the title and we have the details here. And if I click on each of them, it's going to be load and passing the data, going through a whole the process and opening the details view for us. So this is all about MVVM and how you can create things. We learned 3 things here. We learn how to create a view model for the view controller. We learn how to create the cell view model, and also we learn about how to pass a view model and inject that to another details view controller, or what other view controller that we need to representing data. Hopefully it will be helpful in your projects and use it in various kind of the projects that you need. It's so scalable. It can be actually useful for even very big project with the number of the teammates, maybe more than even 5, 6 or 7 developers working on one project, because everything is now categorized on each folder, and so it is so readable and reusable.